In the winter of 1944, the Netherlands was not a country, it was a prison cell. And the wardens had decided to stop feeding the inmates. To understand the sheer scale of the tragedy that befell the Dutch people in the final months of World War II, you have to look past the military maps and the arrows pointing toward Berlin. You have to look at the dinner table of a family in Rotterdam or Amsterdam. By January 1945, that table was empty. The gas had been cut off. The electricity was gone. The coal was gone. And the food, the bread, the potatoes, the cheese that defined the Dutch diet had vanished completely. This was the hunger winter. The hunger winter. It was a man-made famine, a cold-blooded act of collective punishment inflicted by the Nazi occupiers. In September 1944, the Dutch government in exile had called for a national railway strike to support the Allied advance. The Dutch rail workers, brave men and women, walked off the job. In retaliation, the German Reichskommissar Arthur Seyss-Inquart ordered a total blockade of food transport to the Western Netherlands. He essentially sentenced 4.5 million people to starvation. For a 10-year-old boy named Piet, let's call him Piet, though he represents a generation of Dutch children, the war wasn't about ideology or battles. It was about the gnawing, sharp pain in his stomach that never went away. It was about watching his father, once a strong dock worker, shrink until his clothes hung off him like rags on a scarecrow. It was about the cold that seeped into the marrow of his bones because there was no wood left to burn. They had burned the furniture. They had burned the books. They had stripped the wooden blocks from between the tram tracks in the street. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My friend said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers. But I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these tales matter. Please subscribe, like, and comment on this channel. And let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. Now, let's continue. The daily ration dropped to 400 calories. That is less than 2 Snickers bars for an entire day. People began to eat things that human beings are not meant to eat. They ate sugar beets, tough, fibrous lumps meant for cattle. They ground them into a gray, sticky mush that tasted of dirt and despair. And when the beets ran out, they turned to the national symbol of their country, the tulip. Farmers and families dug up the tulip bulbs from the frozen earth. They peeled off the dry skins, boiled them to remove the toxins, and ate them. They tasted bitter. They caused stomach cramps. But they were something. They were matter in the stomach. In this world of gray starvation, the soldier was the enemy. To Piet, a uniform meant terror. For 5 years, the soldiers in the gray-green uniforms of the Wehrmacht had been the masters. They were the ones who kicked down doors in the middle of the night to drag away Jewish neighbors. They were the ones who seized bicycles and radios. They were the ones who stood guard over the food warehouses, fat and well-fed, while children fainted in the streets from hunger. Piet had learned a simple lesson. If you see a truck, hide. If you see a soldier, run. A truck meant a roundup. A truck meant they were taking men away to forced labor camps in Germany. A truck meant they were stealing the last of the grain. The sound of a heavy diesel engine was the soundtrack of nightmares. By April 1945, the situation was apocalyptic. The official ration was effectively zero. People were dying in their homes, too weak to get out of bed. The hunger edema, bloating caused by severe protein deficiency, was distorting the bodies of the children. The dead were piling up in churches because there were no coffins and the ground was too hard to dig graves. The Allies were close. They were in the southern Netherlands, but the Germans were dug in behind the rivers, holding the West hostage. The Allied commanders, General Eisenhower and Field Marshal Montgomery, faced a terrible dilemma. They could attack. They could smash through the German lines. But the Germans threatened to flood the country, blowing the dikes and drowning the very people the Allies were trying to save. And an attack would take weeks. Weeks that the starving Dutch didn't have. They were dying at a rate of 1,000 a day. So, a deal was made. It was one of the strangest agreements in the history of warfare. It was a truce, not for peace, but for bread. On April 28, 1945, negotiations were held between the Allies and the German commanders. The Germans agreed to allow Allied bombers to fly low and slow over the occupied territories to drop food supplies. This was Operation Mana. For Piet, huddled in his cold house in Rotterdam, the sound of the planes on April 29th was terrifying. It was a low, thundering roar. He thought it was the final bombing raid. He thought the end had come. He ran to the window, expecting to see explosions. Instead, he saw something that defied belief. The massive Lancaster bombers were flying so low he could almost see the pilots' faces, and the bomb bay doors opened. But no bombs fell. Instead, thousands of sacks tumbled from the sky. Sacks of flour, sacks of dried egg powder, sacks of chocolate. They fell into the open fields designated as drop zones. The German anti-aircraft guns remained silent. The Dutch people ran into the fields, weeping, waving flags they had hidden for years. It was manna from heaven. But airdrops were not enough. The planes couldn't carry the volume needed to feed millions. They needed trucks. They needed a convoy. This was Operation Faust. The Canadian Army, specifically the Free Canadian Corps, was tasked with the job. They were the liberators. They had fought their way up through Italy, through France, and into the Low Countries. They were tough, battle-hardened men. They had seen the worst of humanity. They had cleared concentration camps. They had fought the fanatical SS. But their orders for May 2, 1945, were unlike any they had ever received. "Load your trucks with food," the officers told them. "Do not load ammunition. Do not load weapons. You are going to drive through the German lines." It was a suicide mission on paper. The Canadians were to drive unarmed trucks into enemy territory, past fully armed German panzer divisions, to deliver supplies to distribution centers. If the truce broke, if one nervous German pulled a trigger, it would be a massacre. The drivers were nervous. Private Jim Thompson, a 22-year-old from Saskatchewan, gripped the steering wheel of his Chevrolet truck. His hands were sweating. Behind him, under the canvas tarp, were tons of white bread, canned meat, and powdered milk. He drove toward the designated checkpoint near the village of Renan. This was the no man's land. He saw the German checkpoint ahead. The barrier was down. A Tiger tank was parked by the side of the road, its 80-mm gun pointing directly at the convoy. The German soldiers stood there, MP-40 submachine guns slung across their chests, looking grim. Jim held his breath. He waited for the flash. He waited for the trap. But the German officer simply looked at the truck, looked at the white flag flying from the antenna, and waved his hand. The barrier lifted. The convoy rolled through. They drove deeper into the occupied zone. The landscape was eerie. It was silent. There were no cars, no movement. The windows of the houses were shuttered. The Dutch people, terrified, were hiding. They heard the trucks. They heard the heavy engines. To them, it sounded like another German convoy, perhaps coming to strip the last of the furniture or take the last of the men. Piet heard them coming. He was hiding under the kitchen table with his little sister. His mother was holding them, her hands shaking. "Shh," she whispered. "Don't make a sound. Maybe they will pass." The trucks slowed down. They entered the town square. The screech of brakes echoed off the brick buildings. Then silence, engines idling. Jim Thompson opened the door of his truck and stepped out. He looked around the deserted square. It felt like a ghost town. He walked to the back of his truck and unlatched the tailgate. He threw the canvas tarp back. The smell hit the air instantly. It wasn't the smell of diesel. It wasn't the smell of cordite. It was the smell of fresh white bread. Inside the houses, noses twitched. It was a smell that many of these children had forgotten. It was a primal scent. It cut through the fear. Slowly, a door creaked open. Then another. A curtain moved. Piet peered out from the window. He saw the truck. He saw the soldier. The soldier wasn't wearing the gray-green of the Germans. He was wearing khaki. And he wasn't holding a rifle. He was holding a loaf of bread. Piet's mother stood up. She walked to the door. She opened it. She stepped out into the sunlight, blinking. She looked at the soldier. Jim Thompson smiled. It was a tired smile, but it was genuine. He held the loaf out. "Here," he said, "for you." She didn't run. She walked. Then she ran. Suddenly, the square erupted. People poured out of the houses. Men, women, children. They were skeletons in rags, their faces gray and gaunt, their eyes huge in their shrunken heads. They swarmed the trucks. Piet ran with them. He was terrified, but his hunger was stronger than his fear. He reached the back of the truck. The soldier was lifting children up. He was handing out tins of biscuits. He was handing out chocolate bars. Piet looked up at the giant Canadian. The soldier reached into his pocket and pulled out a chocolate bar. He peeled back the foil. He handed it to Piet. Piet took it. He didn't know what to do. He had never seen chocolate. He took a small bite. The sweetness exploded in his mouth. It was so intense it almost hurt. He looked at the soldier, and for the first time in 5 years, the uniform didn't look like death. It looked like life. This was the moment the dam broke. The Canadian soldiers, tough men who had fought their way across a continent, began to weep openly. They saw the condition of the people. They saw the bloated bellies of the babies. They saw the dignity of the old men trying to stand straight while they accepted charity. The soldiers began to give away everything. They gave away their rations. They gave away their cigarettes. They gave away their coats. They emptied their pockets. The terror of the trucks had vanished. In its place was a delirium of joy. The Dutch people climbed onto the trucks. They kissed the soldiers. They threw flowers, the few that hadn't been eaten, onto the hoods of the vehicles. But the liberation wasn't just about food. It was about the restoration of humanity. For 5 years, the Dutch had been treated as subhuman by the Nazis. They had been numbers. They had been labor. Now, these Canadians were treating them like people. They were shaking their hands. They were asking their names. In the days that followed, the Canadian summer began. The war officially ended on May 5th in the Netherlands, but the Canadians stayed for months to help rebuild and distribute food. A unique bond formed between the two nations, a romance, quite literally. The Canadian soldiers were young, lonely, and far from home. The Dutch women were grateful, resilient, and charmed by these polite boys from the prairies who said, "Please," and "Thank you," and brought them nylon stockings and soap. Love blossomed in the ruins. Thousands of Canadian soldiers met Dutch girls. They fell in love at dances organized in liberated town halls. They fell in love while distributing soup in the food lines. They fell in love walking through the tulip fields that were finally being allowed to bloom again instead of being harvested for food. This led to a wave of war brides. Over 2,000 Dutch women married Canadian soldiers and moved to Canada after the war. They brought with them their culture, their resilience, and their stories. But the most poignant symbol of this bond came from the Dutch royal family. Princess Juliana, later Queen Juliana, had sought refuge in Ottawa during the war. She gave birth to her daughter, Princess Margriette, in a Canadian hospital. The Canadian government had temporarily declared the maternity ward extraterritorial, so the princess would be born a Dutch citizen. When the royal family returned to the liberated Netherlands, they saw what the Canadians had done. They saw the trucks, they saw the bread, they saw the survival of their people. Princess Juliana made a pledge. She promised that every year, for the rest of her life, she would send a gift to the people of Canada. And so, the first shipment arrived in Ottawa in the autumn of 1945. It was a crate containing 100,000 tulip bulbs. They were planted on Parliament Hill, and when they bloomed the following spring, they painted the Canadian capital in a riot of red, white, yellow, and orange. It was a gesture of thanks that transcended diplomacy. It was personal, and true to her word, the gift never stopped. Today, the Canadian Tulip Festival is the largest of its kind in the world, but few of the tourists taking selfies among the flowers realize that they are standing in a biological memorial. Every red petal is a reminder of the blood that was spilled to liberate the Scheldt. Every white petal is a reminder of the truce that brought the food. And every bulb is a testament to the starving families who dug them from the frozen earth, not to plant, but to eat, just to survive one more day. But the story of the Canadian liberation of the Netherlands didn't end with the flowers or the parades. It left a profound, lingering psychological mark on the soldiers themselves, a mark that was different from any other campaign in the war. For many Canadian veterans, the fighting in Italy or the slog through France was a blur of combat, mud, and noise, a job they did because it had to be done. But the Netherlands was different. It was intimate. Decades later, old men sitting in Legion halls in Winnipeg, Halifax, or small-town Saskatchewan would tear up, not when talking about the artillery barrages or the friends they lost, but when talking about the children. They would talk about the specific faces that haunted their dreams in the best possible way. They would tell the story of the little girl in the blue coat who held their hand for an hour and wouldn't let go, or the boy who wanted a cigarette but settled for a piece of chewing gum and looked at it like it was a diamond. These brief encounters in the rubble-strewn streets of Utrecht, Groningen, and Zwolle changed them. They remembered the feel of the skinny arms hugging their necks. They remembered the way the Dutch people looked at them, not as conquerors, nor merely as allies, but as saviors sent by God. It was a burden of gratitude that was almost too heavy to carry. There is a specific story that circulates among the families of the veterans of the 1st Canadian Army, a story about a truck driver we'll call Jack. Jack was part of the Faust convoy system. He was a rough man, a mechanic from northern Alberta, who had joined the army to escape the Depression. By 1945, he was cynical. He had seen too much death. He drank too much cheap wine when he could find it, and he swore constantly. He hated the army, he hated the officers, and he just wanted to go home to his farm. But on that day, in May 1945, in a small village near The Hague, Jack's war changed. He stopped his truck in the middle of a cobblestone square. A crowd gathered, as they always did, a sea of gaunt, gray faces. Jack climbed into the back of the deuce and a half and started tossing down loaves of white bread to the grasping hands below. It was chaotic, noisy, and desperate. Then he saw her. He saw an old woman standing at the very back of the crowd. She wasn't pushing. She wasn't shouting. She was too weak to fight her way forward. She was just watching, tears streaming down her face, her hands clasped tightly against her chest in prayer. She looked like a ghost, her skin translucent, her eyes sunken deep into her skull. Jack stopped throwing the bread. He jumped down from the truck, ignoring the shouting crowd. He grabbed 2 loaves of bread, clutching them to his chest like footballs. He pushed his way through the mass of people, using his shoulders to clear a path. The crowd parted for the big Canadian. He walked straight up to the old woman. He held the bread out to her. He didn't know what to say. He didn't speak Dutch. He just nodded. The old woman took the bread, but she didn't eat it. She didn't tear into it like the others. She slowly brought the loaf to her face and inhaled. She closed her eyes and breathed in the smell of the yeast, the flour, the life. Then she opened her eyes and looked at Jack. She simply reached up with a trembling hand, took his rough, grease-stained, callous hand, and pressed it to her cheek. She held it there, weeping silently. Jack later told his son that in that moment, all the noise of the war fell away. The artillery, the screaming sergeants, the mud, the cold, it all vanished. He realized that for all the horror, for all the stupidity of violence, he was doing something pure. He was feeding the hungry. He was bringing life back to a place of death. That moment stripped away his cynicism. It healed him in a way he didn't know he needed. And the Dutch never forgot him. They never forgot any of them. In most countries, the memory of World War II has faded into history books. It's black and white movies. It's a chapter to be studied for a test. But in the Netherlands, the memory is kept alive with a ferocity and a tenderness that is unique in the Western world. To the Dutch, the liberation is not history, it is heritage. Every year, on Christmas Eve, a scene plays out in the Holton Canadian War Cemetery that defies description. This cemetery lies in a quiet, wooded area, the final resting place of 394 Canadian soldiers. On that cold winter night, school children, Dutch children, the great-grandchildren of the generation that starved, go to the cemetery. They do not go because they are forced to by their teachers. They go because it is their tradition. They walk among the rows of headstones, and they place a lit candle on every single grave. Imagine the sight. The sun has set. The air is freezing. And in the darkness, nearly 400 candles flicker in the silence, illuminating the names of boys from Toronto, from Vancouver, from Montreal, who never made it home. It is a vigil kept by a nation for the strangers who crossed an ocean to save them. It is a promise kept across generations. We will not forget you. In 2020, during the 75th anniversary of the liberation, the depth of this bond was tested by a new enemy, the pandemic. The world was in lockdown. The elaborate parades that had been planned for years were canceled. The surviving Canadian veterans, now men in their late 90s, frail and housebound, could not travel. They sat in their homes in Canada, heartbroken that they could not make one last pilgrimage to the land they had freed. But the Dutch people refused to let the anniversary pass in silence. In the city of Apeldoorn, which had been liberated by the Canadians in April 1945, a solitary bagpiper walked out onto the deserted street. This was the same street where the Canadian tanks had rolled through 75 years earlier, greeted by cheering crowds. Now it was empty. The piper began to play. The haunting notes of "O Canada" echoed off the brick buildings. And then something extraordinary happened. From the windows, from the balconies, from the rooftops of the apartment blocks, hundreds of Dutch citizens leaned out. They didn't break the lockdown, but they broke the silence. They sang along. They waved Canadian flags that they kept in their closets. They cheered for an empty street, filling it with the memory of the trucks and the tanks. They clapped for the ghosts of the men who had once walked there. And back in Canada, the last surviving veterans watched the footage on the evening news. They sat in their living rooms, thousands of miles away, and they wept. They saw that they were still loved. They saw that the pact made in the hunger winter of 1945 was still unbroken. This is the true legacy of the Faust convoys and the Mana drops. It proved that the most powerful weapon in a war isn't a tank, or a bomber, or a rifle. It's a truck with its back doors open. The Nazi occupation had tried to teach the Dutch people a specific lesson about power. They tried to teach them that power comes from cruelty, that the strong take what they want, that the soldier is a predator who feeds on the weak. For 5 years, the gray-green uniform represented the theft of dignity and the theft of life. The Canadians taught them something else. They taught them that power can be used for mercy, that the strong have a duty to protect the weak, that the soldier can be a provider. When those back doors opened in May 1945, revealing the stacks of white bread and crates of powdered milk, they didn't just release food. They released the future of the Netherlands. They released the possibility of hope. They proved that goodness could return to the world. The starving families were terrified of the soldiers. Yes, the trauma of the occupation ran deep, but in the end, it was the soldiers who gave them back their lives. And that is why, if you walk through a Dutch market today, 70 or 80 years later, and you speak with a Canadian accent, you will see heads turn. You will see smiles. You will see a nod of respect from people who weren't even born when the war ended. Because in the collective memory of the Dutch people, the Canadian soldier isn't just a part of history. He isn't just a strategic ally. He is family. He is the boy who brought the bread. He is the man who reached into his pocket and gave away his last chocolate bar. He is the hero who didn't shoot, but fed. And as long as the tulips bloom in Ottawa, and as long as the candles flicker at Holton on Christmas Eve, that story will never starve.